collaboration that we did with this amazing artist, in which we will launch a limited edition love series, you know? Yes, and he had some of the T-shirts that he created as well, which is basically a donation for Conservation International. So, I mean, like he wrote it beautifully, you know, this is not a T-shirt, this is a contribution, this is like a donation.
I think we're ready.
You ready?
We're ready.
And wear the T-shirt as a badge, you know.
Awesome.
So we're very
We'll
happy.
go. Thanks, Francisco. Are
You're
we
welcome.
about to
Thank you.
start? I think she's saying yes. Okay. The moment of impact is upon us. Thanks for your patience. I'm Linda Levy, the president of the Fragrance Foundation. I'm thrilled to be here today to talk to two buddies of mine who I introduced sort of like a setup a while ago, Francisco Costa and Pam Dalton. So Francisco, what is your title, and besides being Mr. Francisco Costa?
I don't know, I don't have a title.
I think you're working at Amorous, is it true?
Yes, you know, I started this brand, and last year I started a partnership with Amorous, which is a biotech company out of San Francisco, and they offered me a position, which is a creative director for the whole company. In other words, we launched a lot of great brands, you know, with a very strong mission, and the mission really is to change the way we see beauty, change the way we actually consume beauty through incredible ingredients. And ingredients have been sourced, you know, in very disruptive ways, in a sense, you know, like squalane, which is something that's taken out of shark liver. And now we are very happy to say it's one of the top ingredients, you know, it really changed the supply chain, because now we're actually saving 2 million sharks a year by making squalane in the lab. So I think science is on the front run. And for me, it's great to be part of this group because, you know, with nature preservation being so strong for us, you know, and science being so strong for the group, it's a perfect marriage.
So speaking of science, Pam, please tell everyone who you are, where you work, and what you do.
Okay, so I'm Pam Dalton. I'm from a research center in Philadelphia, which is called the Monell Center, and it is the only research center in the world that's devoted to the study of the chemical senses, being that smell, taste, and the feel we get from certain chemicals. And so I'm basically a scientist that works in the lab, and most of what I do is try to understand the human response, the human way to perceive the olfactory world, the smell world, and the way we respond to it, both behaviorally, emotionally, and how our brain reacts.
Pam, it's great having you here today, and it's so fun to be at Francisco's first ever pop-up, which has been alive and kicking for several days now. My story is that when I became the president of the Fragrance Foundation, someone introduced me to the Monell Institute. And at the time, it seemed very intriguing, and I started to learn a bit about the sense of smell through Pam and other researchers. However, the first thing we're going to talk about today is back then, pre-pandemic, we all pretty much agreed that the sense of smell was probably the least valued sense. Pre-pandemic, if you ask people if you were going to lose a specific sense, be it, you know, your sight or your hearing or your taste, it would be pretty much a long list until you got to the sense of smell. So we're united, the three of us,
yes,
in the sense of smell. So for me, what I have seen, and I'd like each of you to share, having also been on the business side of fragrance, people have really, during the pandemic, found that the sense of smell is more important than anything. You're going to give us some scientific background. And the reason it's so fun to meet this new fragrance today is because this is a great example of fragrance is now really credited with transporting people to other places, giving you a feeling of self-care or healing. And why don't you tell us a little about the connection of the emotion, and then we'll go to Francisco, who will tell us how aroma relates to that.
Well, speaking about how the sense of smell was undervalued, there have been surveys out there for years where people said they would rather lose their sense of smell than their cell phone. Believe it or not, it's true. what we learned during the beginning of the pandemic, I woke up in March of 2020 to my inbox filled with people saying, I can't smell. And they just didn't understand how it was like a light bulb turning off on them. They woke up in the morning and the coffee had no flavor and they couldn't figure out what was going on. It turns out that, unfortunately, the COVID virus, its first sign of attack, its first place of attack was the nose. And it took out some of the structures in the normal cavity that allow us to smell. And mostly, happily, for most people, it's returned. There are probably still 10% of people who lost it that may never get back their sense of smell, which is tragic. But what it did is, even if people lost it for a week, they suddenly realized how much of that dimension of their life was missing. It's emotional. They couldn't smell their child or their significant other when they brought them close. The sense of beverage and food enjoyment was completely gone. But they said it was like a gray scrim went over the world, and all of a sudden it lost, the colors were gone, the saturation that we experienced. We have a very special emotional connection to smell. It's because the part of the brain where odors are processed has to go through the limbic system, which is where our emotions reside. And so for that reason, smell is inherently an emotional sense.
Perfect segue to Francisco. So when we first met and you were developing this new beautiful beauty brand, you really didn't think you were necessarily going into the fragrance business. So tell us a little about how you went from the journey from the oils and other pieces you created to get to this moment with Aroma.
Well, the interesting thing is that while I was with the tribe, we, it was 10 days journey, and the scent in the forest was so incredible, right? It was just really, really strong and beautiful, and I thought it was just wood being burned because tons of bonfires throughout the village. So not to realize it towards the end, they are tossing those rocks into the fire and it would sparkle, and the scent became a lot more obvious. So I obviously questioned what it was, and here we go. We have breu, which is this resin, which is very much the core of what Costa Brazil really is. It's an anti-inflammatory. It's a resin, natural resin, by the way. It grows on the bark of the tree, and it can get very, very large if you don't collect often, and it just collapses. And as it oxidizes, it turns into a rock. Oh. So breu is very. It's an ingredient that the tribe really feels it's a religious experience. It's part of every single ritual of theirs. And later to find out that besides being mosquito repellent, it's also antibacterial, antimicrobial, and it's majorly anti-inflammatory. So this, you guys, you're going to pass this around. It's really gorgeous. Let me just light it, Linda, just 1 second, to bring some sort of peace into the room. It balances. I mean, I find that every morning I have to do this. Of course, I did my ritual this morning already. It's gorgeous. You just breathe into it.
You can go into the Amazon with us. Whoops.
So wow. There we go. This is the birth of our fragrance.
Well, this is highly unusual. In fact, this was the product that brought you and me together.
Sure.
And no one in the fragrance industry has done anything like this. And I'm not here to do a commercial, but I do have to mention, Francisco,
wow.
When you first joined the Fragrance Foundation and you showed us this, we had have a category every year in our awards, which are like the Oscars, and it's called the most innovative product. And Francisco submitted this, and I think it's not going to be a surprise to you. It actually won. So Francisco was so new to the beauty industry, no one could even believe that he was coming into our community. And
with a rock.
With a rock. Yeah. So those who were doing different kinds of diffusers or other things were a little disappointed, but this is without question one of the most unusual ways to experience fragrance. So take us a little further on the journey from this to today, which is Aroma.
I remember also that, as you had to nominate the person who did that that product.
Yeah, yeah.
And obviously, the Amazon, right? So our nomination is the jungle, so it was great. Yes, so, that really became, I came back with that scent, the sort of insane sort of, scent which I have not experienced before. And it just felt very natural that I had somewhat start working on a fragrance which took forever, to do, because I came in with, first of all, identified somebody to work with me. So I called David Morse, who is the founder and the owner of DS and Durga, which is a wonderful company as well, fragrance company. And I started working with David, and here comes to his studio in Brooklyn with Braille, with oranges, all this stuff, earths, basically, that I had collected in the jungle, and I'm just like, David has to feel this way. Let's put some water into this. Let's see what it does. So it was really like a very organic, 12 months of discovery of what that was.
Well, that brings up the perfumer role.
Exactly.
So the perfumer who finished this fragrance is
wonderful.
Frank Vogel.
Frank,
picked it up where
Frank.
David left off.
Yes.
And we talk about all of this very frequently because in the old days, meaning maybe 10 years ago, whenever a designer, and we happen to be sitting with one today, would come up with some kind of fragrance in the fragrance industry, it seemed as if the designer had their name on the fragrance, and it didn't seem like anyone else was involved. But I think what Francisco is sharing with you is the most creative storyteller, and the person in the lab, Pam, with all the ingredients is the perfumer. And that role has become even more visible than ever. I used to call it the Wizard of Oz. I'm a little older than a lot of people in the audience here today. But in the Wizard of Oz, the wizard stands behind a curtain, so you never really know who's pulling the strings. So today, it's really exciting for us to talk to someone like Francisco, who created something from nowhere, and, well, I shouldn't say nowhere, the jungle, the Amazon. I hope to get there one day, and work with a perfumer who could translate it. So there's a big part of this fragrance, which I think we're going to talk about, which is emotion. So Pam, can you just give us the science behind it? And I know Francisco wants to talk about the emotion.
Right. So when we are infants, even before we're born, we start learning about our olfactory world, because things that our mother puts on her body, lotions, perfumes, things that she eats or drink, goes into the amniotic fluid and bathes the olfactory, the smell receptors of the baby. And so we're already getting experience of our mother's world before we're actually born. And that starts to form some of these most incredibly emotional memories that sometimes cannot even be expressed in words, which is why it's sometimes hard for someone like Francisco to tell the story in words, because it was such an emotional experience. And language fails us sometimes when it comes to speaking about smell and how it makes us feel. But we can talk about the fact that it transports us back to a place, sometimes decades old, and brings back all of those emotions that were felt at the original time. And that's what a really excellent perfume or a fragrance should do, is it has to have the power to move you into a different space and time, and hopefully remind you of something that makes you feel wonderful.
It's interesting because, to every project, there's a narrative or there is a protocol, right? And I really wanted to break the protocol of creating a fragrance. I did not know what building a fragrance was. Okay, top notes, heart, and bottom notes. So I want to deconstruct the whole thing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Later, obviously, with the geniuses of Frank and David together, I understood actually they had put everything into some sort of a formula, that would make sense, because it goes back to emotion. What's the emotion what is that amazing experience that right away catches, that you feel you're going to that tunnel, you know what I mean? And I find there is the emotional aspect, which I brought from the Amazon, which I felt very passionate about it. And to your point about Frank finishing the fragrance, I started with the olfactive signature, let's say, of Breo, and it was something that was really to be the signature of the brand. which was very successful. In fact, our candle is really, really wonderful and really brings you into that space. But I thought maybe not launching the fragrance right away because designer leaves, Calvin Klein for 14 years and launches a fragrance. It felt like a little bit of a stunt, you know what I mean? Like, so, this is a real serious brand. Our ingredients are so incredible.
Yeah.
They are really magical ingredients, and they have results besides just being very wonderful food for your skin. So I held back onto the fragrance, and then Frank came in, I showed him what David had already stepped out. His business got too big. So Frank came in to help us out, finalize it, and the fragrance had macerated. So the scent, 2 years later, was very different than what we created.
Yeah.
So we had really to go back to it, you know what I mean? So it's fascinating how how alive actually that juice was. It felt, like wine, like fermentation, which is something that's, really wonderful. And I don't think we'll talk much about it eventually.
So Francisco, you had the experience in the moment, smelling this resin as it was lit and against a background of all the botanicals that were present and all of, and the warmth, the heat of the jungle, the humidity. But for a person who hasn't had that experience, what emotions, what feelings do you want this fragrance to bring to an individual who hasn't had that same experience that you did?
Well, I mean, there's a level of sensuality in it, which I think is very important because every fragrance, of course, changes in every body. But I've never seen a fragrance that changes so dramatically in every skin. So it's somewhat, it's emotional, it's like discovery. To me, it's like every day is slightly different. You know what I mean? I don't know why, but it mutates. So the emotion here is a connection to something that I know, but I'm not quite aware of. It's like you wonder, right? It's all very familiar, but it's so unknown. And I think being in the jungle is like that. When I first arrived, I thought that the forest was really tight. I had to go into the trees and what have you. And it's just the grandness of the forest is just so vast.
But this story is very unusual. Most designers who enter the beauty space start with a fragrance, and then maybe it goes to the candle, and sometimes it goes to an oil or whatever. This is a very different kind of journey. So I love the story of when you went into the jungle and these were burning, that you got there. And it also takes us another thing that we wanted to talk about today. In the old days, again, pre-pandemic, all the marketing that seemed to be out there on fragrances was really about sexual attraction. I call it the nightclub phase that never ends. And there were men and there were women, and these were the fragrances for each of those genders and identity, and that's like the way that this industry was built. However, that has changed radically. And yours was a natural progression on this. So today we usually look at fragrances. Some are still very marketed to those who identify as female or male gender specific, but most of them are universal. And Aroma is a fabulous fragrance that absolutely any age, any sexual identity, anyone who's involved with wanting to feel good is going to be attracted to. Let's talk a little about the ingredients, because also, if you really characterize fragrances, there are florals and citruses and aquatics and spicy and whatever. This one has a very interesting combination and without question is universal. So let's talk about those ingredients a bit. What's in this fragrance, Francisco?
Well, on the top notes, you find like a jungle floral, right? Which welcomes you in, but it's not a white floral necessarily, but it's just a mix of the sweet and very welcoming. It's slightly peppery as well, have pink pepper in the mix, and orange blossom, you know what I mean? So that's very tender. It's a mix. The pepper excites, I think, opens up the, the olfactive, channels, or whatever you call it, which to me is very much what Breu does, right? So we're trying to mimic what Breu does. And Breu is also used in the jungle as, something that opens your sixth chakra. So that really you get that jolt of the beautiful floral and the pink pepper, which excites you, and you don't know the world is. Then we go into a second, your heart, which is something a lot more religious, if I may. You have the myrrh, you know, it becomes a little more, you have nutmeg, which also ignites that sense of taste, which I love.
Yeah.
You know, it's almost like, you know, you want to, you know it, you know, it's very close to you. Then you have the bottom notes were things that we love. You know, you have the patchouli, you have the vetiver, and you have the cedarwood, which, by the way, two of the ingredients there are incredible. And they're both, the cedarwood and the patchouli, are also made at our labs at Amherst. And we have, in fact, we partners with Firmenich and on the patchouli and what have you. So it's taking fragrance to another level because what we're trying to do really is to clean the way, you know, we source the ingredients. You know, and that goes back to the whole sensitivity about natural and synthetic.
Let's discuss.
Right?
This
Which,
is a big topic.
Yes.
You know, most of the world thinks that natural is better than synthetic. So we three all have a very strong point of view on this, that it really isn't superior. And I always like to say most people who are attracted to what they think is natural think it will be less allergenic and that it will not. So take out your poison ivy and let's talk about natural. So for my perspective, and we speak about fragrance all the time, let's talk about why it's an advantage for it to be synthetic versus natural. Pam, what do you have to say on this?
Purity, being able to absolutely know what the molecule is that you're working with. Because when you start with a natural, the process of purification is very difficult, it's expensive, and you're not always getting there because sometimes the trace contaminants that are in a natural are so small that you can't see them analytically to know that they've been removed. If you start with constructing the base molecule that you want to actually produce, then you know you have it. And obviously, if you could purify everything out of that plant or whatever, you would have the same molecule. It's not different just because it was created in a laboratory. It's identical. And it's probably safer for most people.
And also, it's sustainable. If you think of patchouli, who has destroyed Madagascar, you know, with, of course, you know, I think we have to be very sensible, right? For instance, Breu, we source Breu with certain communities. We have a responsibility towards those communities, and we're never going to change. And we're also going to support new communities, for sure. January, I was there in one community I had not seen, and it was really extraordinary experience. So by creating this support system to the people that we give back to the people, you're doing, you know, two things. One is that those communities, they're really watching, you know, and protecting the Amazon, right? And number two, you're giving them the means to continue their lives in peace. And also protecting because, you know, it seems like it's just a huge thing, guys. You go into a community like that, I did visit in January, it was 10 people, it was a family.
Yeah.
And they disappear into the jungle for 3 months trying to find 3 ingredients, Breu, Copaíba resin, and Brazil nut. So it's such hard work. So we buy 500 kilos of Breu from one community like that. That's their year worth of salary. So you protect, you know the limitation, but you have to work with that, and also you have the scale. So that also that when it comes, you know, the science, you know, to support all this good stuff that we're doing, but make it even better.
Yes, you have to respect that and sustain that resource as they do, yes.
And just one more thing to the subject here, how we do, how we actually replicate those molecules. It's a very old process of fermentation. Fermentation of what? Sugarcane and yeast. So it's from earth, you know, from the earth back to the earth, right? Because you're protecting. So it's what we're doing is really wonderful.
It is.
Yeah.
And if nothing else, if everything was natural, we'd be wiping out the entire planet Earth.
Exactly.
And people who are really saying that, you know, that's the way it should go, just need to look a little deeper. Very often people ask me, should I read the ingredients on anything? And quite frankly, I wouldn't even know what it's saying, and I get into this stuff quite a bit. So the biggest lesson I think we're trying to share with everyone is that synthetic can in fact be superior to natural because we're not wiping out the planet, and it could be less allergenic. And the great story though behind this is how you're sustaining a whole community.
Yes.
And when you went into the jungle, I've never asked you this, Francisco, were you like on a mission? What was the occasion that brought you to the jungle to find this community where you found brew?
Well, the first time I went, again, I was with the tribe. I was actually in Brazil working with the opening ceremony for the Special Olympics. So that, I was already there, had already left Calvin. So it was a period of discovery. The brand was already created, but I didn't have the goop for anything. I didn't know what the goop would be. I knew that, because I had looked around in labs and what have you, nothing made sense. This is not how I would do it. I started this brand like I started a collection of clothes. I started by identifying the yarn, making the fabric, and designing. So this was the same thing here.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah,
That's
it's kind of the same thing here. So I really had to dig, understand, and what is the essence of this brand. So back to that, I visited where I was first, and I knew that I couldn't source Breu from them because I did to a certain level, but you can't do business, with an indigenous community unless, they're very developed and protected and what have you. So I went around, got, this one company in Brazil, Baraka, who is the largest manufacturer of Brazilian indigenous, ingredients, and I introduced them to Breu to them. I said,
wow.
Can you actually help me source this? In the meantime, I went to different locations, through like a year and a half, identifying areas there was abundance of Breu.
Wow.
So that's why I went this January, which is this one area called Macapá, which is a state that borders with French Guiana, and which I have been buying already from them, but I hadn't seen it. So I went to check it out and make sure that, number one, they've been supported, number two, what kind of production it was, because there's 142 known species of Breu.
Wow.
So it's not that you just, all looks like that. You know what I mean? So you could be buying something from one area, it's called Breu, but in reality, it is Breu, but it's a different type.
I've known you a while, but I never knew what got you into the jungle. I'm really being quite frank about that. But the idea that you started with an ingredient, as you did when you were doing clothing for, what is the thread going to be, that's a very unusual story. I often say this. The fragrance community is made up of thousands and thousands of storytellers, but this one has a very unique piece. So let's go back one more time to what's in the line, because when I met you, you had been to the jungle, you had your resin burning, you had some oils that were out to the consumer or were just about to launch, I believe, a couple of years ago. And what happened next? When did the candle come in? And was that first? And when did Aroma in this progression?
Aroma was sleeping already, kind of semi-done, not talked about, but the candle became very beautiful because the goop of the candle also is 100% natural, sustainable, natural, and vegan, right? So that felt embraced the fragrance in a very wonderful manner, it's so recognizable. I don't know, I'm sure you guys know Aesop, which is a brand that I had known for 25 years. When I saw this brand in Japan, at this one hotel that I was staying 25 years ago, I said, oh my God, this is so wonderful.
Yeah.
And it came back to me for some strange reason that, okay, if I did something, it would have to be that lifestyle. So I created the pipeline for the brand that by going to the Amazon and by finding 3 major ingredients, I threw off everything that I had. I scratched everything off.
Oh, wow.
Because, the shampoo and conditioner or the body soap and what have you now had to be replaced for this incredible oil, which that's what I found to be the most elevated.
Wow.
This is the best ingredient I could find.
Yeah.
It was the Breu, it was the Kaya, and was, the jungle complex, we call it, which is a combination of 3 ingredients.
Let's talk about the candle a bit because it's also highly unusual, fabulous. I'm in love with it. And Pam, you know that during the pandemic, candles, which in the fragrance industry were always an interesting topic or considered an ancillary or a very small piece that would continue to grow, the world has been redone. For me, even in my position, I never lit a candle at home. I can admit that. And ever since March 2020, every night, my husband picks the wine, I pick the candle, we match it up, and it's a very good evening. So I want to talk about the candle thing, environment, and how does that sense of smell, because that is something in the United States of America and beyond has completely changed, and thank goodness we're out and about again. But having ambiance scent or having a candle in your home or a diffuser, it has truly changed lives.
Right. Well, frankly, I'm very glad that the fragrance industry as a whole has decided to devote developing fragrances for candles, because what we had before were very rudimentary kinds of scents going on with candles, often overpowering and really to the point where people would put them, light them, and then turn them off, because now you can use a scent candle the whole evening long, and it just maintains that. What happened in the pandemic, I mean, we were all spending 24/7 inside our homes.
Yeah.
We had no change of environment, and so how do we fix that? Well, not everyone could redecorate, but you could certainly purchase a candle online and change the environment completely just by the way it smelled. And that's where people discovered that they could rotate the environment that they were living in and do so in a way that was gratifying, that was healing and felt wellness.
It really has been surging, we would say. It's on fire, Francisco. And you know, if you're sitting at your dining room table and you were working all day and then suddenly it's dinner time or whatever, you really wanted to identify that in a different way. A lot of fragrances were translated into candles. This is a very big question in the industry. Some people, most people think a personal fragrance which you wear is not the fragrance that would be in your home. In the olden days too, it used to be about Christmas, like balsam and pine and whatever. So Francisco, for your fragrance candle specifically, how does it relate to the other products in the line, and where do you see it? Because I think it's a very big point of entry for a lot of people into your Costa Brazil.
Yes, I mean, you just brought it up, wellness. I think you walk into Costa Brazil and you sense that. It transports you. Again, the emotion aspect of it. So it's very important for us, the fragrance. It was like really the number one thing. It really brings you into this brand. And to your point, I mean, I believe that things have to be as great and as unique as it can be. So I don't necessarily agree, neither think that I'll be doing matching fragrance and candle, you know, on the lineup. But if the scent works better in that candle group, that will be a candle, won't be a fragrance. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So you have to go as you build, you know, identify what works better, and that's it. You know, it's achieving the max for every product that you create. So we have the olfactive signature, obviously, the Breu, in most of our products. You know, the body oil was the first one that we did. It's a hit, you know, it's like sex in a bottle, you know, it's like so delicious, it's so hydrating also, it's food for your skin. It's just like, there's nothing like it. But for instance, we have this amazing body bath salt, which is very the grains are the salt itself is very, very big, you know, the grains of it, which is very interesting. So I use that as a scrub, which detoxify and balance the pH, but, and we have the T2 in that. The T2 is a name for the actual original scent, which evolved in different renditions. But I love when I'm in a bath, I have this salt, which is very earthy. There's a lot of vetiver in there as well. And there's copaiba resin, and there's passion fruit. And those two ingredients makes up something called the CBA, which is a cannabinoid active, but it's not from hemp. So it relaxes you to the max.
Oh, wow.
Then to offset that, to the power of the fragrance, I drop the oil because number one, you know, what the salt takes away, the oil is going to give you back, right? But then I do something even more crazy. I just have white rose petals on top. So you lay in this bath, and you have, you know, scent the roses, and you feel the earth underneath you. It's the most gorgeous experience. And I think that's how we go also about creating and, you know, and making the product so versatile, making you feel good. I'm serious.
You've just transported
you-
all of us.
Yeah.
This is pretty
If you
crazy.
have
I'm a
this
shower
app-
girl.
Yeah.
That's
Me
over.
too.
Yeah,
No,
yeah.
Me too. I'm a total shower person. I never took baths. I hate stagnant water. It's something, a psychological trauma.
Feel
Water for
free
me
to
has
share
run,
everything today,
You know,
guys.
and but then I had to try, you know, the salt for so many times. We had so many renditions, you know, of the salt. And the last one, where I said, okay, this is the salt. Now let me play with what's this most incredible ritual. And it goes back to New Year's ritual in Brazil. You know, everybody's in the ocean, everybody's in white, and we're all offering white roses to the goddess of the sea. So let me see if what happens here.
Oh my
Guys, it
gosh.
was the most incredible experience because really, you scent the roses on your nose because you're there, and then you're like in this immersive sort of geyser.
Yeah.
You know, it's the most beautiful thing.
So everyone should picture this tonight.
Please do it.
Go into position again.
Yeah.
This is who's going to be in the bathroom.
Yeah, exactly.
Unbelievable. We got another product to talk about, I think. I just discovered today, because fragrance is something you usually put on before you leave the house, or you light your candle when you're home. But having a portable version of Francisco Costa's fragrance line, I didn't know this was out. Is this out in the real world?
That's out in the real world.
And everyone has a bag who's in the live audience today is going to go home with this. So tell us
Yes.
about this product, which, Pam, I'm going to ask
Pam,
you.
you have to tell me how you feel about it.
Yeah. And now it's different.
Right?
Yeah, it's transformed.
By the way, I think we have to do a little game here, guys.
Okay.
Why don't we all close our eyes and we pass it around the aroma, spray on your wrist, and I'd like you to identify your first emotion, right? What do you feel about this? And you write it down for me on that card. Then I want to take some, but Pam, I'm sorry, it's
No,
you
no,
now.
no.
And
While they're getting out their instruments,
yes.
Pam is going to talk.
Yeah, well, I mean, I got some citrus and a little bit of floral at first, but now I'm getting some of the deeper notes, you know, some of the more sensuous ones are coming through for me. And what's interesting is that, you know, the jungle is, especially for someone who's not native, can be a sort of intimidating place, right? There's a curiosity, a discovery that's going on. There could be a little danger lurking.
Always.
Exactly.
Yes.
A snake, an
There's a big
animal,
snake
right?
behind-
Absolutely, absolutely. I've been in the Bornean jungle and
Crazy.
it's scary. And there's that sense of, you know, sort of that little bit of curiosity tinged with a little bit of anxiety or almost like an arousal, I would say. Not just enough arousal
100%.
to make it interesting, yes.
Yes.
So has everyone sprayed out in the live audience? Look at everyone. They're going into their trance. Francisco, I know you did a lot of this, and some of it was on social media. Do you want them to shout out?
Yeah, please. I'd love you to tell me how you feel. How does it make you feel?
It's
what
about-
color do you see? You know, does it taste like something? You know, what's that initial emotion? And I love to play with color because I see a color I mean, it's just so evident for me, this color. And as we did our organic campaign, you guys, I'm sure you have seen it, just asking people completely unscripted how they felt about it. And most of everyone felt the same way, which is so wonderful.
Okay, so let's talk about the emotion part of this. I'm going to just share mine. So I put it on this morning. It was a beautiful, bright day in New York, walked across 57th Street. I love the morning, and I love the feeling of newness and like anything can happen. So I sprayed as much of my body that I possibly could before I walked across 57th Street. And for me, it brought me a sense of tranquility. And that's not a normal thing for me to say. It brought me a sense of like anything could happen today. And it was a very positive feeling. So that was mine. What was yours, Pam, when you first sprayed it on?
Yes, I actually found it to be more arousing initially than tranquil. The tranquility came after I realized that, I was in a safe environment. But it spurred me to think about, to look around and see, because it was almost like the fragrance wasn't coming from me, that it was in the environment around me.
Wow.
And so I was more curious, and I was like exploring, basically. And then I felt a calmness, yes.
But today's sort of a summary. It's not humid or whatever. The first time I received Aroma, I just smelled it, and I called Francisco. So I figured he's like hanging out downtown, and I would just like share my initial feeling. Meanwhile, we had this like terrible connection. Do you remember this? I think it was January, and he was actually being driven on the side of a mountain in Brazil. Probably, like if I stay on the phone with you, I'm gonna fall off. My first experience, though, I remember extremely well, was extreme sensuality. It really smelled like something, and maybe because it was a crisp, freezing cold day and the heat was on. So we know that sometimes you smell something and it smells different at another time. And since we have a medical expert here, does it have to do with the environment, how moist your skin is? Like, what changes that at one time I thought this and today I think that?
Well, what changes with the environment and humidity and temperature is not just the volatility of the fragrance material, but how well your nose works. And so, yes, your nose is better in a warm, humid environment than it is in a dry, cold environment. So basically, you may be adding different molecules to the mix in a warm, humid environment that are more available because of the volatility, and also more the nose is just working at a higher capacity to actually receive those molecules because the receptors are well humidified. And that's the way it works, yes.
Pam, that's like a new factoid. I didn't know. Is that new for you too? So that's why I thought one thing in January, and now I think it's June. First day of summer maybe today.
Yes, it is. The
Did
solstice.
you know this, Francisco?
No, at all. I
Oh,
just
thank
thought that.
goodness Dr. Pam
I
is
just
here.
thought the magic of the skin changes by the magic of your nose.
Let's take it one step further. Many people ask me all the time, why does it smell like this on him and like this on me and different on someone else? How does the body chemistry do that?
That's a very good question. Some of it has to do with the amount of oils and lipids in your skin itself, whether the skin is dry or more moisturized and humidified. That's why some of the best time to put fragrance on is right when you step out of your shower or your bath, and your skin is well positioned to receive the fragrance and sort of hold on to it at that point, as opposed to just sort of.
Because your pores are somewhat open. Probably.
Exactly. But we all have a unique body odor, and I don't mean the kind that comes after we've worked out at the gym necessarily, but our own unique body odor combines with that. Now, it turns out that you can't disguise your body odor with perfume. You can still enhance it, but you can't lose the ability to recognize someone just because they have a fragrance on. So it's the combination, that unique combination of the fragrance and our own unique individual body odor, which is demonstrated, by the immune system. So it's basically something that tells us how healthy and well we are, the smell of our bodies.
I'm going to jump in a minute because I'm getting that time check. Did we want to allow the people in the live audience to ask a couple of questions? Because for me, I'm thinking about fragrance 24/7, but that factoid that I just got the answer, which I never would have known before from Dr. Pam, is pretty big. So does anyone in the audience have a question for either Pam or Francisco or me? Don't be shy.
I want you just to relate how you felt.
There's someone in the back. Let's do that, and then we'll go around. Shout it out.
Well, first of all, the question is, are you wearing the fragrance for you, or are you wearing it for people around you? And if you're wearing it for you, then I think you need to pay attention to what what types of notes actually make you feel differently in different situations, because that's what you're looking to do with a fragrance. If you want to develop a unique signature fragrance, then I suggest you start asking the people around you what reminds them most of you and what works well on you. It's so idiosyncratic. There really are no hard and fast formulas that we have ever discovered, although based on your skin and some things like that, there may be some that work better on you than others, but there isn't really like a diagnostic that we can do.
However, we who want to sell fragrance
Yes.
have some procedures. So you talked about floral. In the fragrance world, and I want to ask what Aroma is, quite frankly, because it has so many great ingredients. We organize it, and many times retailers online will actually create like 6 or 7 different categories: floral, aquatic, spicy, woody, etc. If you think you like floral and you just go visiting in that floral category online, you're probably going to hit something. Or if there's a fragrance you really like or you think you like, most of the technology allows you to say, if I like this, I'll like that. But I've never tried to categorize aroma because it's so many different things to me. So how would you categorize it if you had to, Francisco? Is it possible?
I don't know. I don't know, because the experience that I had living in the jungle, but also creating it, again, what I tried to do was deconstruct it.
Yeah.
So it really is, it's a fragrance for you, because it takes you. I mean, it just becomes you. So it's like, it's very intimate for me, that experience. And I love, once I mentioned, I think I mentioned to you that fragrance is the first thing to walk in a room, right? But it's also the last thing to leave, right? If obviously, it has that impact. And I love to feel that tail of a fragrance on myself. I love to, oh my God, it's kind of crazy, but I never thought about that either, because I wore 2 fragrances, in my growing up, which was like Vetiver from Guerlain and Mitsoko, which was like very different. And then I went into Penhalions because they're very fresh, and then I did some Libro Vermelhos. But I find that, it's so unique, this, it taps so many different lifestyles, if I may, or personalities.
Yeah, I don't think, some can almost not be categorized. That's why I understand now why Francisco's so interested in how you feel about it, like what your emotion is. Or I'm talking about walking down the street or being in the winter or the summer. Does anyone have, and you also mentioned color. Synesthesia is a big thing in the fragrance industry conversation, and the scientists and the creatives. And very often, if everyone closed their eyes right now, just for 1 second, and smelled whatever they smell of aroma, you're thinking of different colors. So you got to shout it out. What color does anyone in here?
Like your lipstick.
So reddish?
Red.
Wow, wow. Is that, what else? Green. Orange. Yellow.
A mix between blue and purple.
Wow.
Wow.
It's almost a rainbow, but they're
You
in a
see?
certain area. Yeah.
That's
I'm looking at
incredible.
your jacket, and that's,
Ah!
it's a
something.
warm
Yeah.
color that I'm looking for.
Yeah.
that-
I've
that
never
I
been in the
associate
jungle,
with.
but it makes me feel that earthy sort of thing in a way, which could be any of those colors. So
But isn't it interesting? He thinks of green, right? Because
yeah,
it is
and
green.
she's thinking red.
Because the bottom notes are very, very green. You're talking
green.
about, icy red. I don't know if it's a condition, because while I was there, I mean, everybody has the red painted faces, right? And the fire of the breu, and this excitement of the pink pepper. So it's like, I don't know, I always see red. That's why actually we did
wow.
red, text, copy in our campaign, because, it was just a way, my personal way of communicating, what I felt. But it's so interesting, from purple to green to red to yellow, oranges, and it's fascinating.
Wow.
Wow.
Listen, I met Pam and Francisco before today, but I cannot say how many more things that I learned. So I want to say, even though I'm at your house, I want to thank you.
I thank you.
Francisco, thank you
Yes,
for having
thank
us
you.
here today.
Oh my God.
It's so exciting to be in the first ever pop-up for Costa Brazil. And I don't think that the audience that's live here is going to leave. So they have a lot of adventure. Are there any other experiences coming up you want to tell us real quick?
Again, I mentioned, this wonderful event we're having tomorrow. On Friday, we have a Pride celebration.
Good.
Also, it's going to be super fun, great music. You're all welcome to come and do the good thing. Plus, we have $25 off anything that you purchase today. So,
Okay, you got a lot of
you
work
guys
to do in
have
this room.
fun.
Thank you all for
Thank you so
coming
much.
today.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you, Pam.
Thank you, Francisco.
I thought it was when it started, it was very intimidating. I mean, they're both like masters in what they do.
But you're the